The Colosseum wasn't just a building, it was the ultimate symbol of Roman dominance, rising out of the city's heart like a stone titan. It told anyone who gazed upon it that Rome was untouchable. Its massive arches stretched toward the heavens, echoing the empire's ambition. Every detail was engineered with purpose, to control, and to remind people that their empire wasn't just powerful in war, but in culture, entertainment, and architecture. The Colosseum was a neutral space. It was propaganda made of stone. To walk by it was to be reminded you belonged to Rome, a force bigger than yourself. Step inside, and the real magic began. 50,000 voices roared in unison, creating a thunder louder than any storm. The air was heavy with tension, mixed with the smell of sweat, dust, and anticipation. Vendors sold food, gamblers whispered bets, children pointed in awe, while nobles reclined in shaded seats. For the ordinary Roman, this wasn't just a show, it was a ritual. The Colosseum was identity carved into stone, a place where they felt part of something greater than their individual lives. Here, they weren't just citizens. They were spectators of history unfolding before their eyes. Beneath the arena floor, secrets stirred. The hypogeum, a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, buzzed with activity. Slaves pushed massive pulleys, lifting cages toward trapdoors. Gladiators whispered their last prayers. Animals growled in darkness, and handlers prepared spectacles with precision. When the floor opened and something unexpected emerged, the audience gasped in shock. This wasn't random chaos, it was calculated theater. The Colosseum was designed to surprise, to manipulate emotion, to turn unpredictability into awe. Long before cinema, Rome understood suspense. The hypogeum was less backstage and more an engine of wonder, controlling the heartbeat of the crowd above. Politics pulsed through the arena. Emperor's new spectacle was as vital as soldiers or taxes. Panem, et spread, and circasse wasn't entertainment. It was strategy. Discontent citizens could be silenced with free bread and bloody shows. Every gladiator fight was a distraction from the empire's flaws. Corruption, war losses, or heavy taxes. The Colosseum was the emperor's stage, and each spectacle an act of manipulation. A ruler who filled the arena with games was seen as generous, even merciful, regardless of the cruelty beneath it all. In this way, the amphitheater wasn't just stone, it was a political tool, sharpened with applause. Gladiatorial combat was more than violence. It was theater of morality. Courage was tested, loyalty displayed, betrayal punished, all in front of a roaring crowd. Romans learned their values through blood. Strength was honored, weakness ridiculed, cowardice despised. When a gladiator fell, the audience judged his worthiness with gestures of their hands. Life and death became communal decisions. The Colosseum blurred the line between justice and spectacle, turning human suffering into lessons. For Romans, these weren't meaningless deaths, they were symbols reinforcing what the empire valued most: bravery, discipline, and the dominance of Rome itself. Blood wasn't wasted, it was symbolic ink written across the sand. Each drop told a story of power and control. A gladiator's final moments weren't private. They were public statements about what Rome rewarded and condemned. Even death fighters carried meaning. Their bravery elevated them into examples. Their fear condemned them into mockery. The arena sands soaked up not only blood, but also memory, transforming tragedy into narrative. Rome's genius wasn't just conquering lands, it was mastering perception. To make cruelty appear noble, to turn sacrifice into theater. That was the empire's subtle yet devastating form of control. For many Romans, the Colosseum wasn't just entertainment, it was sacred space. While not a temple, it had a divine aura. People believed the gods themselves watched these spectacles. Jupiter might approve bravery, Mars reveled in bloodshed, and Nemesis punished arrogance. The games blurred the line between worship and entertainment. Sacrifice wasn't only on altars, it was on the arena floor. The Colosseum created a shared spiritual experience, binding the crowd together in its own way. It was church, battlefield, and stage at once. When citizens cheered, They weren't only applauding, they believed they were echoing divine will. Animals were more than props, they were proof of empire. Lions from Africa, tigers from Asia, elephants from India, even ostriches and giraffes paraded into the arena. Exotic beasts shocked and thrilled spectators, showing Rome's reach beyond imagination. Each animal's presence was a living map of conquest. When a lion roared or an elephant stomped, it wasn't just nature on display, it was empire embodied. The hunts weren't about survival, but about spectacle. Beasts became symbols, reminding the people that Rome ruled lands so vast, even the wildest creatures now stood under its dominion. The arena was empire compressed into theater. For gladiators, the Colosseum was paradox. It was both prison and opportunity, nightmare and stage. Some entered as slaves, condemned criminals, or prisoners of war. Others volunteered, lured by the promise of wealth and fame. Once inside, their personal identities dissolved. They became symbols: courage, fear, defiance, spectacle. Loved or hated, they were never ignored. Many lived short lives, but their names echoed longer than expected. They became Rome's living myths, forged by blood and applause. The Colosseum elevated them to icons, only to crush them moments later. Every tear carved them into memory, and every silence buried them deeper. And yet, the Colosseum itself endured beyond all of them. Fires, earthquakes, wars all scarred it. But the arches remained. Its stones carried centuries of memory. Long after Rome's empire fractured, tourists today walk through ruins. But the whispers linger. Blood, sand, secrets, they cling to the walls. Faint, yet unforgotten. The Colosseum wasn't just built to host shows, it was built to last forever. And in that, it succeeded. Rome fell. Emperors vanished. Gladiators died. But the amphitheater remained. More than entertainment, more than politics. It became a time machine carved in stone, carrying stories across centuries to our own. Gladiators weren't just fighters, they were brands. Each one had a story carefully crafted to captivate the crowd. Some were exotic warriors from distant provinces, presented as living trophies of Rome's conquests. Others were cast as villains, rebels, or savages, meant to be despised. Then there were the heroes, those who fought with unmatched bravery, who earned nicknames whispered in taverns and carved into walls. Merchants sold little clay figures of their favorite gladiators. Fans painted graffiti praising their skill, and children played pretend battles in alleys. Gladiators weren't nameless bodies, they were celebrities of blood, with fame that sometimes outlived them. But behind the spectacle, the reality was brutal. Gladiators trained in special schools, ludi, where discipline was harsh and survival depended on obedience. These weren't gyms, they were prisons disguised as academies. Fighters drilled with wooden swords until their arms trembled, sparred under the eyes of harsh instructors, and endured punishment for even small mistakes. Bonds formed among them, but betrayal lurked close. Any day, a comrade could become tomorrow's opponent. The training prepared them not just to fight, but to perform. Every move had to be dramatic, every strike visible to the furthest seat. Gladiators weren't only killers, they were actors in Rome's deadliest theater. The emperor's presence transformed every event. When the ruler entered, trumpets blared, the crowd erupted, and all eyes turned to him. His gestures carried the weight of gods. A raised hand could mean mercy, a downward motion death. Sometimes, emperors played with the crowd, teasing, delaying, letting anticipation build before deciding. Their choices weren't always about justice, they were performances of power. By sparing or condemning a gladiator, the emperor reminded the people that ultimate control rested in his hands. The arena was his stage, and he its lead actor, using human lives to write his authority into memory. Women, too, played their part in the Colosseum's drama. While they didn't sit in the best seats, many were among the loudest fans. Roman poets often mocked women who swooned over gladiators, describing them as love-struck and reckless. But behind the satire was truth. Gladiators had allure, scarred, dangerous, yet admired. They embodied a raw masculinity that Roman elites both despised and envied. Some women sent letters, others offered money, and rumors swirled of secret affairs. To the crowd, these romances blurred reality and spectacle. The Colosseum wasn't only about death, it was about desire, power, and the strange charisma born from violence. The Colosseum also displayed the empire's wealth in extravagant ways. Some shows weren't about fighting at all, but about wonder. The arena floor could be flooded, transforming the stage into a lake where miniature naval battles took place. Ships clashed, soldiers drowned, and the audience gasped at the impossible illusion. These events weren't frequent. They were too costly and complex, but when they happened, they etched themselves into memory. Imagine sitting in the stands, watching a sea rise in the middle of Rome. It was proof that the empire could bend nature itself to entertain. Spectacle wasn't only blood, it was vaudeville. Animals played roles not just in hunts, but in symbolic execute. Condemned criminals were sometimes thrown to beasts, their deaths framed as justice. The crowd didn't see cruelty, they saw order. Rome portrayed itself as a civilization where chaos was devoured, where criminals were erased by nature's raw power. To some, it was terrifying. To others, thrilling. The line between punishment and entertainment dissolved. Death wasn't hidden away in dungeons. It was made public, transformed into theater. Rome turned execution into ritual, convincing its people that justice and amusement could coexist on the same blood-soaked stage. Foreign ambassadors often sat in the stands, witnessing the games. For them, the Colosseum wasn't entertainment, it was a warning. Every lion that roared, every gladiator who bled, every chia that shook the stone arches reminded outsiders of Rome's reach. Diplomacy here wasn't carried out with words, but with spectacle. Visitors left, not only impressed, but intimidated. The games shouted what Rome wanted the world to know. Resist us, and this is your fate. The Colosseum was soft power cloaked in blood, a psychological weapon stronger than any legion. It conquered hearts through fear long before swords struck. Yet for all its grandeur, cracks appeared in Rome's obsession with spectacle. Some philosophers condemned the games, calling them cruel distractions that corrupted morals. Thinkers like Seneca argued their watching death numbed compassion, turning citizens into passive participants in cruelty. Christians, too, rejected the games, refusing to cheer for slaughter. Their refusal wasn't just religious defiance, it was social rebellion. Over time, whispers of discontent grew louder. The Colosseum, once una fin, began to divide. What had been Rome's pride became its moral question. Could an empire built on spectacle endure when its people began doubting the cost of blood? Still, the Colosseum endured centuries. Fires burned its wooden parts, earthquakes cracked its stone, and vandals stripped its marble. Yet the skeleton of its greatness stood tall, even ruined. It commanded awe. Medieval Romans believed it had supernatural power, calling it the wonder of the world. Pilgrims visited its arches as though they were holy relics. The arena shifted from a stage of violence to a ruin of memory. Its meaning changed, but its presence remained. The Colosseum proved that stone could outlast empire, carrying echoes of screams long after the voices themselves had vanished into dust. Today, tourists shuffle through the ruins with cameras, but the silence is deceptive. Stand in the arena, and imagination fills the void. You hear the crowd roar, smell the dust, see the sand stained red. The Colosseum hasn't lost its power, it has simply changed its language. Where once it spoke with violence, now it speaks with history. Its arches whisper stories, reminding us that Rome was both magnificent and merciless. The arena isn't only about what receipts, it's about what remains. Blood fades, empires fall, but memory carved in stone outlives them all. That's the Colosseum's eternal secret. The gladiator schools were worlds of their own, hidden behind thick walls that echoed with the clang of practice swords. New recruits entered, shackled, stripped of freedom, but soon forged into something strange. Not just warriors, but performers. Training was relentless, mixing military discipline with theatrical instruction. The men learned how to strike, but also how to make a strike look dramatic from the top seats of the Colosseum. Every gesture was part of a script. Even defeat had choreography, designed to amplify tension. The schools turned humans into living currency flesh, polished into a spectacle Rome craved. Within these schools, bonds formed in the shadows of desperation. Gladiators shared meals, whispered jokes, and offered support during punishing drills. Yet at night, lying on hard beds, each knew the man beside him might become tomorrow's opponent. This paradox created an intimacy laced with suspicion. Trust was rare, loyalty fragile. To survive, they balanced friendship with caution, caring for one another while preparing to kill if ordered. That mix of camaraderie and rivalry fueled the drama of the games, giving every clash a sense of authenticity. The crowd wasn't watching strangers, they were witnessing tangled relationships unravel in blood. Some gladiators, through sheer talent or luck, carved out legendary reputations. They were adored like modern athletes, with fans shouting their names, plastering graffiti on city walls, and buying souvenirs bearing their images. Wealthy patrons bet fortunes on their survival, and politicians courted their favor, hoping proximity to fame might sway them. Rome, for all its cruelty, loved winners. Successful gladiators sometimes earned freedom, granted the rudes, a wooden sword symbolizing release. But many chose to stay. Why? Because outside the Colosseum they were nobodies, but inside they were gods. Glory was addictive, and fame chained them tighter than iron. The Colosseum was also Rome's grand stage for executions. Criminals, rebels, and prisoners of war often met their end here, but their deaths weren't simple. Punishments they were elaborate shows. Some were forced to reenact myths, cast as villains destined to be devoured by beasts or burned alive. To the audience, this wasn't cruelty. It was entertainment, framed as justice. For Rome, punishment wasn't hidden away. It was made public, turned into ritual. Executions doubled as lessons. Disobey Rome, and you'll become a spectacle. Justice, in the empire's hands, was theater, and the crowd cheered as order was restored in blood. Animals brought from the far corners of the empire added spectacle and exotic flavor to the games. Lions from Africa, tigers from Asia, crocodiles from Egypt all paraded into the arena, representing Rome's dominion over nature. Hunts were Venetians, showcased gladiators fighting beasts, but also staged power plays. The message was clear. If Rome could dominate wild predators, it could dominate anything. Yet these hunts weren't always victories. Sometimes animals turned on trainers. Sometimes they broke free, charging toward the crowd. In those moments, panic surged, and the illusion of control fractured. Even in spectacle, nature sometimes reminded Rome who was stronger. The Colosseum's architecture played its own role in the performance, with seating carefully divided by class. The amphitheater wasn't just a place to watch, it was a reflection of Roman society. Senators sat closest, basking in comfort and shade, while commoners packed the upper tiers, squinting under the sun. Even slaves and foreigners were given specific sections, reinforcing Rome's hierarchy. But in those moments of spectacle, the divisions blurred slightly. All eyes fixed on the sand below. For a few hours, rich and poor shared gasps, cheers, and outrage. The arena united Rome by distracting it from the cracks whitening elsewhere. Emperors often used the Colosseum to distract from political chaos. Bread and circuitous, as the saying went, kept the people docile. When taxes rose, when corruption spread, when famine threatened, the games grew larger, bloodier, more elaborate. It was political theater, disguised as entertainment. By delivering thrills, emperors bought loyalty or, at least, silence. The crowd, sated by spectacle and free food, forgot hunger for a moment. Rome's problems didn't disappear, but they drowned in applause. The Colosseum wasn't just a building, it was a pressure valve, venting the empire's frustrations before they erupted into rebellion. But not all citizens embraced the blood. Stoic philosophers condemned the games, urging Romans to seek wisdom instead of violence. To them, the Colosseum symbolized moral decay, a distraction from virtue. Christians, persecuted and often executed within its walls, saw it as the empire's darkest face. Their refusal to cheer marked quiet defiance. Over time, their voices grew. Slowly, whispers turned into movements, movements into faith, The Colosseum, once Rome's greatest pride, became a battleground, not of swords, but of ideology. Its legacy shifted, tangled in debates about power, cruelty, and what it meant to be civilized. Still, the crowd's appetite for spectacle never faded easily. Even when whispers of morality spread, the games thrived. People traveled for miles to witness the roar of beasts, the clash of blades, the emperor's fateful gestures. The Colosseum fed a primal hunger that pulsed beyond logic. It wasn't just about politics or justice. It was about release. Watching danger and death unfold reminded Romans of their own fragile lives. Each cheer was both celebration and relief. It's not me down there. The Colosseum thrived because it gave Rome an illusion of control over fate itself. Centuries later, the ruins stand silent, yet powerful. Tourists shuffle across cracked stones. But if you close your eyes, you can hear it: the echo of drums, the chant of the mob, the whisper of swords slicing air. The Colosseum is more than a ruin. It's a memory carved in stone, holding both pride and shame. It tells us that civilizations rise on spectacle, that power is often performed, and that even the mightiest empires eventually fall. Blood dries, sand shifts, but secrets linger. The Colosseum isn't. They just are ruin. It's a mirror reflecting the timeless theater of human desire. The underground tunnels of the Colosseum were as important as the arena above. Known as the hypogeum, this labyrinth was alive with pulleys, cages, and hidden doors. From here, animals were lifted into view. Gladiators emerged dramatically, and stagecraft transformed the sand into living myth. The crowd rarely saw these mechanics, but they felt the magic. A lion appearing from nowhere, or a gladiator suddenly raised into sunlight, gave the games an air of divine intervention. In truth, it wasn't gods, just Roman engineering. The hypogeum was a backstage world where men sweated in shadows to make others gasp in daylight. Beneath those tunnels also lived fear. Prisoners awaiting execution could hear the roar of the crowd above. Each cheer was a reminder of what awaited them. Guards paced the halls, dragging chains, while handlers shoved half-starved beasts into cages. The air stank of damp stone, blood, and animal musk. In those moments, hope thinned. A man condemned could sometimes bribe his way into a quick death or appeal to a sympathetic guard. But most knew fate was sealed. The underground was a liminal space. Neither life nor death, just a waiting room where dread pressed heavier than the stone above. Above ground, spectators basked in excitement, oblivious to the torment below. For many, attending games was a social event, not unlike going to a theater today. Families came together, merchants sold food, and gossip buzzed as loudly as the lions. Some arrived not to watch combat, but to be shown display wealth or curry favor with influential patrons. The Colosseum wasn't just Rome's playground, it was a network. Deals were struck in the stands, alliances whispered between maches, reputations polished by laughter and cheers. Blood was the attraction, but politics and prestige pulsed through the seething like veins feeding the empire's heart. Merchants found fortune outside the Colosseum's gates. Vendors hawked roasted chestnuts, honey cakes, and wine watered, just enough to stretch profits. Souvenirs were sold, from tiny figurines of gladiators to charms blessed for victory. Children tugged at parents' robes, begging for trinkets, while beggars lingered, hoping for a coin from revelers flushed with excitement. These scenes softened the brutality within. For a moment, it looked like any marketplace, yet every laugh, every sale, echoed back to the arena's heart. Commerce thrived on violence, proving that Rome's economy, as much as its politics, leaned on the spectacle of blood. Emperors were keenly aware of the Colosseum's role as political theater. A well-timed game could soothe public anger after a tax increase or distract from military blunders. Emperors who staged grand spectacles were remembered fondly, regardless of flaws elsewhere. Those who ignored the games risked unrest. The Colosseum was more than stone. It was a tool. By giving the people excitement, rulers gave them relief from hunger, poverty, or frustration. Rome's citizens might grumble at politics, but a day in the amphitheater could silence discontent. It was bred in circuses in perfect harmony, an empire held together by sand and spectacle. Yet behind the grandeur lay staggering costs. Exotic animals had to be shipped across oceans, gladiators trained and housed, elaborate sets constructed, ships sank, handlers died, and beasts perished in transit. Still, emperors poured treasure into the games, seeing them as investments in loyalty. Taxes often rose to fund spectacles, though few citizens connected their lighter purses to the lions roaring in the arena. The empire bled wealth into sand, and though the games dazzled, they drained Rome's coffers. The Colosseum wasn't free. Entertainment was an empire's heartbeat, fueled by coin as much as blood. While the crowd roared, some Romans recoiled. Philosophers called the games barbaric distractions, unworthy of a people claiming civilization. They warned that indulgence in cruelty weakened moral fiber. Others saw the games as numbing agents, dulling the population's ability to resist tyranny. To them, the Colosseum wasn't unity, it was control. The laughter, the applause, the chants of kill were chains disguised as celebration. Still, voices of dissent were drowned by drums and cheers. For most Romans, the games weren't questions of morality, they were tradition. The Colosseum didn't ask for approval, it demanded participation. Silence, too, became complicity. Despite dissent, the gladiators remained central figures. Their struggles resonated with the people in strange ways. A slave or prisoner fighting for survival mirrored the struggles of everyday citizens under empire. Victory offered hope. Defeat brought catharsis. Crowds projected their own hardships onto these men, cheering as if their personal battles were fought in every swing of the blade. It blurred lines between performer and audience, binding gladiator and spectator in shared illusion. In that bond lay the true power of the games. Not blood alone, but the sense that survival, even momentary, was possible against all odds. Stories from the arena spread like wildfire. Ballads were sung of gladiators who defied impossible odds. Poems carved their names into memory, and gossip fueled tavern chatter for weeks. Myths mingled with reality until the two blurred. A gladiator might be remembered not for what he did, but for what people believed he had done. Heroes were born in blood, but they lived on in stories. These tales kept the Colosseum alive, even when its stones grew cold. In words and whispers, Rome's greatest theater traveled far beyond its walls, embedding itself into the very soul of the empire. The Colosseum itself became a character in these stories. Not just stone and mortar, but a living entity that swallowed men and roared back legends. For Rome, it was a monument to strength, resilience, and control. For its victims, it was a monster of sand and teeth. Its walls absorbed every cheer, every scream, every whispered prayer. Today, as tourists gaze upon its ruins, they see history, but for Rome, it was present, alive, unyielding. The Colosseum was never passive. It demanded blood, consumed lives, and shaped Rome's destiny. It stood then, as now, not just as a ruin but as a warning. The Colosseum wasn't just about gladiators and beasts, it also staged elaborate marked naval battles. Engineers flooded the arena, transforming sand into water. Miniature ships clashed, rowers struggled, and actors played out sea battles Rome had fought. For spectators, it was pure magic. Imagine walking into a theater expecting combat, and instead seeing an ocean where sand had been. These Naumachia demonstrated Rome's mastery over both land and sea. They weren't common, since flooding the amphitheater was costly and dangerous. But when they happened, people never forgot. The Colosseum proved it could hold not only men and animals, but entire oceans. Fire spectacles were another marvel. Specially built machinery could simulate burning cities, collapsing towers, and volcanic eruptions. Audiences gasped as fire roared across sets. Actors screamed, and gladiators fought amidst smoke. It was theater, with a heartbeat. Danger palpable in every flame. Rome wanted its citizens to believe no story was too big for the empire to tell. If Troy could burn in the Colosseum, then Rome itself seemed immortal, powerful enough to recreate any past. Flames lit up the night sky, the Colosseum glowing like a beacon. It wasn't just blood. Rome staged it was imagination unchained. Animals, too, were paraded in ways beyond combat. Exotic beasts from Africa, Asia, and beyond were shown as trophies of conquest. Elephants marched in decorated armor. Tigers prowled in gilded cages, and ostriches ran loose for the crowd's amusement. These displays weren't just entertainments, they were political. Every beast represented Rome's reach. Proof the empire stretched across deserts, jungles, and mountains. Citizens who had never left Italy could see the world's wonders in one arena. To them, it was Rome conquering nature itself, bending every corner of the earth to imperial will. Animals symbolized victory as much as men did. Trainers who've worked with these animals lived dangerous lives. They risked being mauled, trampled, or bitten daily. Yet their skills gave the game spectacle. Some developed deep bonds with their beasts, while others treated them harshly, ensuring ferocity in the arena. The public rarely cared about the men behind the cages, but their expertise shaped the shows. A lion that leaped on cue, or an elephant that bowed, made spectators roar louder than swords ever could. These nameless trainers formed the invisible skeleton of the Colosseum. Without them, the empire's greatest stage might have faltered into chaos. Their sacrifices kept illusion alive. Not all animals were feared. Romans adored novelty. When giraffes first appeared, they caused a sensation. People marveled at their long necks, painting them as gifts of the gods. Parrots and peacocks dazzled with color, brought in not for fights, but for spectacle. The Colosseum wasn't always drenched in blood. Sometimes, it was wonder. Children pointed, merchants laughed, and poets scribbled verses about strange beasts never seen before. These lighter moments balanced the horror. They reminded people Rome wasn't only about cruelty, it was curiosity too. The empire fed its citizens marvels, proof that Roman eyes could gaze upon the world entire. In Thestan's seating was strictly divided. Senators in elite sat closest to the arena, their status displayed in cushions and fine robes. Women and poor citizens sat farther back, squeezed onto hard benches, while slaves often stood. This hierarchy mirrored Rome itself. Even in leisure, class was visible. Still, for a few hours, everyone looked toward the same center, united by spectacle. The roar of the crowd drowned social divisions, if only temporarily. The Colosseum reminded Rome of inequality, but also of unity. It was theater and mirror, revealing both the cracks and cohesion of the empire. For women, the Colosseum was complex. They were barred from certain seats, yet many attended. Some came to enjoy spectacle, others to admire gladiators. Ancient gossip tells of wealthy women infatuated with fighters, sending gifts, even arranging affairs. Gladiators became more than warriors, they were celebrities, desired as much as feared. Their scars were marks of honor, their presence intoxicating. To some romance, this was scandalous, proof that the Colosseum blurred moral lines. For women, though, it was liberation, a place where desire and fascination weren't easily hidden, a rare glimpse of freedom in a rigid society. Children, too, were part of the Colosseum's world. Young boys idolized gladiators, pretending with wooden swords in alleyways, dreaming of fame. Girls carried small figurines, cheering their favorite fighters with shrill voices. To them, the arena wasn't horrid, it was plit. Rome's rulers knew this, encouraging loyalty from childhood. Games molded future citizens. By exposing children to spectacle, Rome ingrained both pride and obedience. They grew up believing empire and blood were inseparable. What began as cheers in childhood often became support for conquest in adulthood. The Colosseum wasn't just entertainment, it was indoctrination disguised as laughter. Outside the arena, Rome pulsed with stories of the games. Tavern songs retold epic battles, graffiti immortalized gladiators, and dice games gambled on outcomes. The Colosseum stretched far beyond stone walls. It seeped into culture. People measured days by who fought. Victories were toasted with wine, and defeats lamented in whispers. The games built a shared language for citizens, uniting strangers in common memories. Even those too poor to attend still lived in their shadow, repeating tales until the Colosseum felt like part of their own homes. Rome itself became an amphitheater, echoing with endless retellings of sand and blood. And yet, beneath all this grandeur, silence lingered. When the arena emptied and the sand lay stained, Workers swept away bones, blood, and broken weapons. The cheering stopped, torches dimmed, and shadows reclaimed the Colosseum. Intact yet, the truth emerged. Rome's spectacle was fleeting. Glory lasted only as long as the roar. By dawn, new shows replaced old, fresh blood covering yesterday's stains. The Colosseum devoured endlessly, never satisfied. Its power wasn't in permanence, but repetition. It demanded more bodies, more beasts, more stories. Silence was only pause. The hunger always returned. Rome itself fed that hunger daily. Gladiator schools were the true engines behind the spectacle. Hidden across Rome, they trained men in brutal routines, turning prisoners, slaves, and volunteers into performers of death. These schools, renowned as sleuthy, were half-prison. At daily drills, harsh diets, and ceaseless discipline stripped away weakness and forged warriors. It was systematic, almost scientific. Trainers knew exactly how to condition bodies and break spirits until only survival instinct remained. The Colosseum's glory began in these barracks, where sweat and fear dripped into the sand long before blood ever touched the arena floor. The most famous of these schools was the Ludus Magnus, located right beside the Colosseum. It wasn't just a training ground, it was a factory of legends. Connected by an underground passage, gladiators could march straight from practice into combat. Imagine living in earshot of the cheering crowd, knowing each roar might soon be for you or against you. The proximity reminded gladiators daily that glory and death were separated by a single doorway. The Ludus Magnus wasn't merely walls and cells. It was a pipeline feeding the Colosseum's insatiable hunger for fighters. Every man inside was raw material awaiting transformation. Life inside a gladiator school was harsh. Men slept in cramped cells, often chained to prevent escape. Meals were simple, designed to bulk fighters with muscle and fat, making them durable in combat. Trainers pushed them with wooden swords, endless sparring, and grueling marches. Injuries were common, punishment for failure even more so. Yet for some, hope flickered. A skilled gladiator could win fame, wealth, and sometimes even freedom. It was a cruel irony. The very system that enslaved them also dangled liberty as bait. For many, that slim chance was enough to keep swinging, enough to endure. Gladiators weren't all slaves. Some were volunteers, often free men crushed by debt or seeking fame. These men, called octorati, signed contracts to fight, trading freedom for the roar of the crowd. Some sought money for their families. Others chased the intoxication of celebrity. They entered knowing the risks, but believing glory outweighed chains. Romans viewed them differently. Volunteers weren't pitied but admired. They became living contradictions. Free men choosing bondage for honor. Their presence blurred lines between shame and respect, making the games even more magnetic. The Colosseum didn't just consume victims, it attracted dreamers too. Inside the barracks, hierarchy ruled. Veterans earned privileges, better food, and respect. New recruits scrubbed floors, hauled water, and endured humiliation. Brotherhood formed in sweat and shared pain. Men fought side by side, trained together, and mourned losses like family. Yet betrayal simmered. To a man's death could mean another's promotion, another's survival. In that volatile mix of loyalty and rivalry, gladiators forged bonds sharper than steel. They were both comrades and competitors, allies one moment and enemies the next. The Colosseum thrived on these contradictions, feeding on tension as much as blood. The barracks weren't safe, they were crucibles. Gladiator schools also doubled as businesses. Owners, called laniste, invested in fighters the way merchants invested in ships. Each man was an asset, bought, trained, and rented out for games. Records were kept of wins, losses, injuries, and earning potential. A gladiator wasn't just a man, he was a commodity. This cold calculus turned human lives into statistics. Success brought wealth to lanista. Failure brought financial ruin. Behind every swing of a sword, money clinked. The Colosseum wasn't only entertainment, it was economics. Blood spilled on sand, translated directly into coin, binding violence and profit in unbreakable chains. Among trainers, the doctors held special importance. They were veterans, often scarred men who had survived the arena. Their task was to mold recruits into specialists. Some trained as heavy-armed fighters, others as nimble duelists. The variety kept matches unpredictable, audiences entertained, and tactics fresh. A doctor's word was law. His approval meant survival. His disdain meant doom. To students, he was both mentor and executioner, a figure who could raise them to glory or condemn them to quick death. The Colosseum's artistry was born from these instructors, blending brutality with precision like a painter shaping chaos. Fame followed the best fighters. Even before they set foot in the arena, gladiators were marketed like celebrities, with posters, carvings, and public gossip fueling anticipation. Rome loved its champions. Women adored them. Poets praised them. Gamblers bet fortunes on them. The Colosseum sold names as much as battles. For men inside the barracks, this fame was intoxicating. Proof they weren't forgotten slaves but icons. Even if death loomed, glory gave life meaning. In this twisted stage, renown became armor, defiance against despair. Gladiators lived hard, but they also lived larger than most free men could dream. Still, many never escaped the barracks alive. Training was only rehearsal for slaughter. Injury, infection, or punishment claimed lives before combat ever did. Some men cracked under pressure. Others broke their own chains in desperation, choosing death over spectacle. Their stories rarely left the walls. For every hero Rome remembered, dozens vanished nameless into shadows. The Colosseum thrived not only on glory but on erasure. Forgetting was as vital as remembering. The sands sparkled with legends, but beneath lay bones of those erased. Men whose sweat built Rome's theater, but whose names never reached its songs. The schools, the trainers, the dreams, and the despair all fed into the Colosseum's endless appetite. The arena wasn't simply where battles happened. It was the final act of lives rehearsed in pain. Every man who stepped into sunlight carried the weight of months, sometimes years, of preparation. Behind every cheer was a system designed to crush, mold, and exploit. Rome's genius lay not only in building amphitheaters, but in building men into fuel. The Colosseum wasn't spontaneous. Cassock was carefully curated blood, rehearsed and refined long before blades ever met. That hidden structure made Rome's theater unstoppable. Some gladiators became household names, celebrated far beyond the arena walls. Their images were carved into oil lamps, painted on tavern walls, and etched into children's toys for citizens who had little else to dream of. These men were celebrities. They represented courage, resilience, and a strange kind of freedom. Even though most were enslaved, crowds loved them not for their chains, but for their defiance. A single victory could ignite devotion, making ordinary fighters into living legends. Rome was obsessed with them, a society that worshipped heroes born in blood and sand. The fame of certain gladiators even rivaled senators and generals. People gossiped about their love affairs, their scars, and their victories, with the same intensity as modern fans discuss athletes or actors. Some were invited to elite banquets, treated as prized curiosities by the wealthy. Others became folk heroes for the poor, proof that strength and skill could elevate even the lowest. Fame blurred the lines of status, giving gladiators a strange power. Though owned by others, their popularity made them untouchable. Rome, paradoxically, feared and adored them, turning slaves into icons. Merchants capitalized on their fame. Cheap trinkets bore the likeness of popular fighters, while gamblers whispered odds on upcoming betting became an obsession, fortunes rising and falling on each clash. For many Romans, the games weren't just entertainments, they were investments. Some families were ruined by losses, others enriched overnight. The Colosseum wasn't only an amphitheater, it was a marketplace of hope and despair. Each sword stroke carried not only blood but coin, binding the spectacle to economy as tightly as to culture. The gladiator was both a warrior and a wager. Not all fame was celebrated. Scandals clung to gladiators like shadows. Rumors of affairs with wealthy matrons, bribes for favorable matchups, or rigged fights spread quickly. Rome loved heroes, but loved gossip even more. A fighter who seemed invincible one week might be mocked the next. Fame was fragile, a torch that burned bright, but risked consuming its bearer. Some gladiators courted scandal willingly, reveling in notoriety. Others hid, fearing exposure could cost them favor or life. The Colosseum created fame, but it also devoured it with the same hunger it devoured men. Some emperors despised the attention gladiators received, fearing it rivaled their own authority. Stories tell of rulers jealous of fighters adored by the people. To remind citizens of hierarchy, emperors occasionally forced gladiators to humble themselves publicly, appearing in chains outside the arena. Yet, such displays rarely erased admiration. If anything, it fueled more fascination. The emperor could command armies, but gladiators commanded hearts. That subtle power unnerved Rome's rulers, proving that control wasn't always about politics. Sometimes, it was about who drew the loudest cheer. The role of women in this world was fascinating. Some attended games purely as spectators, but others pursued gladiators with fierce passion. Stories exist of noblewomen disguising themselves to visit barracks, bribing guards for secret encounters. To them, gladiators embodied raw vitality, danger, and allure no senator could match. While these tales may be exaggerated, they reveal how gladiators weren't just warriors, but cultural symbols of forbidden desire. Rome judged these women harshly, but fascination endured. Love afirst with gladiators became part of the Colosseum's legend. Scandals whispered in both streets and palaces. For gladiators themselves, fame was deep. Adoration could secure privileges, better treatment, even political protection. But fame also painted targets. Rivals schemed harder, audiences demanded more blood, and Lannister pushed their stars into ever riskier fights. A nameless gladiator might survive in obscurity, but a famous one rarely retired quietly. The crowd loved to see legends rise, but also to watch them fall. Rome's obsession guaranteed that the brighter a man's fame, the quicker his flame was destined to burn out. Glory was intoxicating, but it carried the scent of ashes. Beyond Rome, fame spread to distant provinces. Tales of great fighters traveled by merchants, soldiers, and travelers. A gladiator might never leave Italy, yet his name could be whispered in Africa or Gaul. These men became international figures, proof of Rome's cultural dominance. The games weren't just for locals, they were propaganda for the empire. By exporting stories of gladiators, Rome exported its identity. Ruthless, powerful, and larger than life, the Colosseum's sand may have been local, but its echoes reached the edges of the known world. Fame turned Rome global long before conquest did. Fame also blurred into myth. A gladiator might die young, yet stories inflated his feats until he became superhuman. Victories multiplied, defeats forgotten, until reality was replaced by legend. Songs painted men as demigods, invincible champions, touched by divine favor. In truth, most were ordinary men caught in extraordinary circumstances. But Rome loved myth more than fact. To citizens, believing in heroes was more satisfying than knowing their flaws. The Colosseum didn't just make celebrities, it manufactured gods, woven from blood, lies, and longing. That myth was as important as the games themselves. The fame of gladiators, both real and imagined, highlights Rome's paradox. The empire built on order, hierarchy, and control also created heroes who defied it. Slaves became legends, prisoners became idols, and emperors themselves grew jealous of men adored in sand. Fame was the Colosseum's most dangerous weapon, not swords or beasts, but stories. Those stories shaped dreams, desires, and identities, far outlasting the roar of the crowd. Rome's rulers could silence men, but they could never silence the echoes. Fame was the Colosseum's immortality, and it thrived long after blood dried from the sand. The Colosseum was not only about battles and beasts, it was also a stage for Rome's imagination. Elaborate stage sets transformed the arena into forests, deserts, or even entire cities. Painted backdrops, props, and mechanical devices created illusions so real that audiences gasped. One day they might see a jungle filled with leopards. The next, a miniature Troy burning to ash. These transformations turned the amphitheater into the world's largest theater. Rome didn't just want to watch battles, it wanted to see history, myth, and empire come alive in front of its eyes. Stagecraft relied heavily on hidden machinery. Trapdoors allowed animals and fighters to appear suddenly. Given the sense of divine intervention, platforms rose and fell, shifting scenery with breathtaking speed. Engineers became magicians, their gears and pulleys performing miracles beneath the sand. To the crowd, it seemed effortless, but hundreds of workers toiled unseen to keep illusions alive. For them, mistakes weren't just embarrassing, they could be deadly. A malfunction could trap a gladiator underground or unleash a beast too early. Yet the spectacle demanded perfection, and Rome's machinery rarely disappointed. Some events blurred theater with execution. Myths were reenacted not by actors pretending to die, but by real men condemned to death. A criminal might be cast as Icarus, flying on wings before plunging to his end, or as a hero devoured by lions in a tale of sacrifice. For audiences, these were both moral lessons and entertainment. Death became a stage prop, reality and performance indistinguishable. Rome's cruelty was masked in storytelling, its violence wrapped in myth. What horrified modern minds thrilled ancient crowds who saw justice and legend intertwine. At times, music guided the drama. Trumpets announced combat, drums rolled with suspense, and flutes played during interludes. Music wasn't background, it was narrative, amplifying tension and joy. A gladiator's strike might be punctuated by a cymbal crash, his victory accompanied by horns. In this way, the Colosseum was closer to opera than battle. The harmony of sound and sight turned violence into choreography. Citizens weren't merely watching, they were swept into a symphony of blood and spectacle. Every note deepened immersion, making the Colosseum feel like both battlefield and stage. Costumes added to the illusion. Gladiators sometimes fought dressed as mythic heroes or foreign warriors, embodying enemies Rome had conquered. Spectators cheered as symbolic Persians, Egyptians, or Celts fell beneath Roman steel. This was propaganda disguised as entertainment, teaching audiences that Rome's dominance extended beyond the arena. Costumes turned combat into allegory, reinforcing empire's story. By seeing myths replayed with Roman triumph, citizens learned subconsciously Rome was eternal, destined to rule. In this way, the Colosseum doubled as classroom, training not only bodas in barracks, but minds in the stands. Even intermissions held marvels. Between battles, trained performers staged acrobatics, juggling, and mock duels. Dwarfs fought miniature combats, clowns entertained with slapstick, and dancers performed elaborate routines. These diversions reminded audiences the Colosseum wasn't endless blood but variety. Rome wanted citizens entertained from sunrise to sunset. Pauses gave workers time to reset stage machinery. But to the public, they were spectacles in their own right. The games were never monotonous. If blood dulled interest, laughter rekindled it. Colosseum made the amphitheater irresistible. Horror softened by humor, cruelty veiled with charm. Exotic displays often took the spotlight. Whole landscapes were recreated with real plants, imported animals, and artificial lakes. Citizens who had never traveled beyond Rome's walls suddenly saw palm trees, crocodiles, and camels. These spectacles weren't accidents. They were political demonstrations. Rome wanted its people to witness empire's reach. Every display shouted, "The world belongs to us." Spectators left the Colosseum not only entertained but convinced of Rome's supremacy. It wasn't just spectacle, it was empire distilled into sight and sound. Proof that conquest could be carried into leisure. Behind these shows were armies of workers. Carpenters built stages, painters created illusions, handlers wrangled beasts, and stage managers kept chaos orderly. Their names are forgotten, but without them, the Colosseum's marvels would collapse. They lived in shadows, invisible to glory yet essential to it. While gladiators basked in fame, workers bore weight of risk. For them, each day meant sweat, danger, and anonymity. They weren't heroes, but they were lifeblood. Rome celebrated its champions, but the Colosseum stood because nameless men gave their labor freely, their sacrifices unrecorded. Audiences themselves became part of the spectacle. The roar of 50,000 voices was thunder, drowning out hesitation. Chance built momentum, guiding gladiators' courage and sealing criminals' fates. Spectators waved scarves, pounded benches, and sang praises to their favorites. In those moments, the Colosseum felt alive, not just from battles, but from human energy. The games fed on collective emotion, transforming individuals into a single, roaring beast. The arena didn't just stage spectaculate, consumed the audience too. They weren't observers, but participants, complicit in every drop of blood spilled. The Colosseum shows blurred boundaries between reality, theater, and propaganda. Rome engineered not just entertainment, but a worldview. Citizens learned empire through stories, celebrated conquest through combat, and accepted cruelty as natural. This wasn't accidental, it was strategy. The games weren't about mindless bloodlust. They were about shaping identity, befusing match music, and machinery. Rome turned violence into culture, theater into propaganda, and spectacle into glue-binding society. The Colosseum wasn't just an amphitheater, it was Rome itself in miniature. Brutal, beautiful, ingenious, and terrifying. A mirror of empire's soul. The Colosseum was a theater of empire, but it also revealed cracks in Roman society. For senators and elites, games were chances to flaunt generosity and win favor. Hosting spectacles bought popularity, turning blood into political capital. But for common citizens, attendance was both gift and distraction. Bread and circuses kept people fed and entertained, reducing unrest. Behind roars of approval lay silent control. Rome's leaders used games to steer loyalty. The amphitheater wasn't just about battles, it was a pressure valve for politics, a tool to manage empire's restless heart. As Rome's niche grew, the Colosseum adapted. Shows became grander, bloodier, and more symbolic. Generals were turning from campaigns, staged victories in miniature, parading prisoners and beasts as if the battlefield itself had been transported to the arena. These performances blurred reality. Citizens saw empire's victories firsthand, reinforcing pride while hiding war's true costs. No starving legions, no disease-ridden camps, only glory. Through spectacle, Rome rewrote its wars, sanitizing chaos into triumph. The Colosseum told citizens, empire never fails. This was history, propaganda, and entertainment stitched into a single, glittering performance. Yet cracks showed in this narrative. Not every spectator adored the blood. Philosophers criticized cruelty, poets mourned wasted lives, and early Christians condemned brutality. Some Romans whispered that the games made people numb, addicted to death. These dissenting voices were drowned out by cheers, but they planted seeds of doubt. The Colosseum wasn't universally loved, it was contested ground. For some, it was Rome's pride. For others, its shame. The amphitheater revealed divisions between power and conscience, spectacle and morality, empire and humanity. Rome's glory always carried shadows of unease. The Colosseum mirrored Rome's obsession with control. Every detail from seating to costumes reinforced hierarchy. Senators in prime spots, women and slaves in the back, foreigners treated as curiosities. This wasn't random, it was design. By staging empire's order within the arena, Rome reminded citizens of their place. The games were lessons in power, hierarchy, and submission. Even while watching battles, spectators lived them. Every roar confirmed Rome's structure. Power at the top, obedience below. The Colosseum wasn't just entertainment, it was a social diagram carved in stone and sand. Still, the arena also created unlikely heroes. Some gladiators transcended their role as slaves and became legends. Adored by fans, courted by elites, and feared by rivals, their fame rivaled that of generals. This paradox was striking. Men stripped of freedom became icons of strength. In them, citizens saw both rebellion and discipline. Gladiators embodied Rome. Issa contradictions, slaves treated like kings, killers celebrated like champions. The powerless transformed into stars. Their existence questioned Rome's order even as it reinforced it. The Colosseum elevated and destroyed them, proving fame could be deadlier than swords. Behind the glamour, gladiators lived harsh lives. Training schools drilled them relentlessly, shaping their bodies into weapons. Discipline was brutal, punishments severe, escape nearly impossible. Yet within these schools, bonds formed. Gladiators became brothers, their survival tied to each other. Camaraderie, soft cruelty, turning despair into solidarity. Some even volunteered for the life, lured by dreams of glory or escape from poverty. Their choice was dangerous. But in Rome, danger sometimes offered more opportunity than safety. The gladiator's path was narrow, brutal, and uncertain, but for a few, it was a road to immortality. The Colosseum's cruelty also extended to animals. Exotic beasts, lions, tigers, elephants, crocodiles were imported at great cost. They symbolized Rome's reach, proof of empire's conquest over nature itself. But their presence also fueled bloodlust. Hunts staged in the arena were brutal displays, pitting man against beast in battles that thrilled crowds and drained forests. Species vanished, hunted for Rome's pleasure. These spectacles were empire devouring nature, an appetite as relentless as its wars. To Romans, beasts were trophies. To history, they were victims of entertainment. Their extinction, another cost of empire's hunger. Yet not all was blood and cruelty. The Colosseum also hosted pageants, plays, and ceremonial events. It wasn't only death that drew crowds, but also grandeur. Weddings, parades, and public announcements took place within its walls. Citizens saw the amphitheater as the city's heart, a place where Rome's greatest moments unfolded. In times of joy and sorrow, the Colosseum gathered the masses. It wasn't merely an arena, it was Rome's stage for all emotions. Within its stone embrace, empire's story was told not only in blood but in celebration, unity, and spectacle. Even in decay, the Colosseum endured as symbol. When stones crumbled and shows ended, its shadow lingered. Medieval pilgrims saw it as proof of Rome's fallen greatness. Scholars marveled at its engineering. Artists at its majesty. Though stripped of marble and scarred by time, it refused to vanish. The amphitheater became more than building. It became image. People no longer saw games, but memory, an echo of empire carved into stone. The Colosseum story didn't end with gladiators, it continued with every generation that gazed upon its ruins. The Colosseum stands today, not only as ruin but as mirror. It reflects Rome's triumphs, cruelties, and contradictions. It shows humanity's hunger for spectacle, power, and meaning. For some, it is a marvel of architecture. For others, a graveyard of lives lost. Its stones whisper of laughter, screams, music, and silence. The amphitheater endures because it embodies more than empire. It embodies humanity itself. We look upon it and see ourselves, our creativity, our cruelty, our longing for greatness. The Colosseum is not just Rome's legacy, it is the world's reminder of what we create and destroy. The Colosseum was more than a stadium, it was a machine that consumed lives. Every spectacle required workers, architects, trainers, beast hunters, guards, and priests. Behind the roar of the crowd was a massive workforce keeping the arena alive. The amphitheater was a city within a city, its corridors buzzing with slaves, vendors, and officials. Each had a role to play, ensuring the day's show unfolded without flaw. In this way, the Colosseum reflected Rome itself, a place of hierarchy, labor, and order, all working to feed the hunger of empire's people. But for all its power, the Colosseum could not escape Rome's shifting fate. When the empire's economy faltered, games became harder to fund, exotic beasts grew scarce, wars drained treasuries, and even emperors hesitated at the mounting costs. Citizens noticed the spectacles that once dazzled began to shrink in scale. Bread and circuses were no longer enough to hide empire's struggles. The Colosseum, once Rome's greatest tool of control, began to expose cracks in the empire's strength. What had been a stage for dominance now hinted at decline, its glory weighed down by unsustainable excess. Still, emperors clung to the amphitheater as symbol. Even as Rome staggered, leaders used the Colosseum to project stability. Rulers announced reforms there, staged shows to distract from crises, and leaned on its majesty to preserve illusion of strength. For citizens, stepping inside the arena still evoked the building itself inspired loyalty, even when empire faltered. Its architecture spoke louder than politics. The Colosseum was proof of what Rome had achieved. Even if Rome itself was fading, this paradox kept the amphitheater alive. Crumbling empire, enduring monument. The Colosseum also played a spiritual role in Rome's imagination. Sacrifices to gods, rituals, the four games, and the spectacle itself all carried religious undertones. Blood spilled in sand was more than violence it was offering. Theater and cosmic alignment. Rome saw empire as divinely favored, and the Colosseum as altar of that favor. Every victory is staged to reinforce destiny. In this way, the amphitheater blurred religion and politics, making the arena not just entertainment, but ritualized proof of empire as a chosen path. The games told citizens Rome's power was not only earthly but divine. Yet, with the rise of Christianity, the Colosseum's meaning began to change. What once felt sacred to Rome's gods became offensive to the new faith. Christians condemned the games as barbaric, sinful, and wasteful. Some martyrs were said to have died in the arena, turning its sands into ground of suffering. While the exact stories remain debated, the symbolism was powerful. For Christians, the Colosseum became a site of cruelty, not glory. As the faith spread, the games dwindled. What had been a stage of Rome's greatness turned into a reminder of its sins. By the 5th century, the Colosseum no longer echoed with roars of crowds. Earthquakes damaged it, funding dried up, and priorities shifted. The once great amphitheater became a quarry, its stones repurposed for churches and palaces. Rome cannibalized its monument, stripping marble, iron, and blocks. Yet even in decay, the Colosseum refused to disappear. Its skeleton loomed over the city, too large to erase. Citizens walked past ruins, reminded daily of former power. The Colosseum became a ghost of empire, silent but unyielding, enduring even when its purpose was gone. Medieval Rome reimagined the Colosseum. Legends claimed it was built by demons, or that its sand hid treasures and sorcery. Pilgrims came to see it, awestruck by its vastness. Artists sketched its ruins. Poets described its haunting silence. Though broken, it inspired. The Colosseum shifted from functional building to cultural icon. It symbolized both greatness and downfall, marvel and warning. People no longer saw gladiators, but myth. Its meaning was reborn through imagination, proving that even ruins can speak louder than empires. Carrying stories long after the last battle fades, Renaissance thinkers revived fascination with the Colosseum. They studied its design, measured its arches, and admired its engineering. Architects borrowed its styles, using the amphitheater as blueprint for theaters and stadiums across Europe. What was once Rome's playground of blood became a school of art. The Colosseum stones taught lessons in proportion, structure, and resilience. Through ruins, it shaped the future of architecture. This rebirth, proof Rome's legacy was only conquest, but creativity. Even broken, the amphitheater stood as teacher, passing knowledge to generations who never saw gladiator sand. Today, the Colosseum is one of the world's most visited landmarks. Tourists walk its corridors, imagining roars of crowds and clashing swords. Guides recount tales of emperors, gladiators, and beasts. Yet the amphitheater is more than attraction, it is memory embodied. Its stones hold centuries of echoes, from triumph to tragedy, worship to ruin. To stand inside is to step into history's pulse, to feel the weight of humanity's hunger for a spectacle and order. The Colosseum's survival is not just accident, it is testament to our obsession with remembering. Even when remembering hurts, the Colosseum's greatest secret is that it was never only Rome's. It belongs to humanity. It shows what people can build when ambition burns, and what people can destroy when appetite blinds. It warns of excess, cruelty, and control, but also inspires with creativity, resilience, and in blood once stained its sands. But today, footsteps of visitors replace the echoes of screams. The amphitheater remains alive, not in death, but in memory. The Colosseum whispers across centuries. Here's humanity's mirror. where we see both our greatness and our flaws. When you picture the Colosseum, maybe you see a single event frozen in time, a gladiator lifting his sword to the crowd, an emperor raising his thumb, or a lion charging from its cage. But the truth is, the Colosseum was a living, breathing schedule of endless spectacles. Morning hunts, midday executions, afternoon battles, each segment carefully planned. Spectators knew when to cheer, when to gasp, and when to rise in awe. The day unfolded like theater, with rhythm and structure, ensuring the energy never faltered. This wasn't chaos, it was a carefully orchestrated empire-wide performance. Behind the curtain of spectacle lay logistics so vast it rivaled modern stadiums. Think of the underground cells, pulleys, trapdoors, and elevators. Designed centuries before machinery became commonplace, lions and tigers could appear suddenly through hidden platforms. Prisoners awaiting execution paced in dark chambers. Stagehands, often slaves or condemned workers, risked their lives keeping the illusion seamless. The engineering was not just impressive, it was dangerous, and countless workers likely died unseen, crushed by cages or burned by torches, their names lost beneath the roar of applause above. The Colosseum was also Rome's message to the world. This empire could conquer nature itself. Exotic animals from Africa, elephants from India, crocodiles from the Nile all paraded onto its sand. The more unusual, the greater the spectacle. These beasts symbolized Rome's reach, a living map of conquered lands. But behind the AW was violence. Entire species were nearly hunted into extinction to satisfy Roman crowds. Tigers, lions, even hippos, creatures admired in mosaics, were casualties of empire's appetite. Rome didn't just conquer humans, it conquered the animal kingdom too. Yet, there was a darker undertone. Some spectators came not for games, but to see justice-orvent. Criminals were executed in the arena, often in grotesque stage performances. Myths were reenacted, with condemned men forced into roles of tragic heroes. Kill the stand-ins for legendary characters. Imagine being cast as Orpheus, only to be torn apart by wild beasts. This mingling of theater and execution blurred lines between art and cruelty. For Rome, justice wasn't about it was about spectacle, teaching lessons through blood. Still, for gladiators, the arena could offer strange hope. Slaves and prisoners of war could rise to fame, adored by the same crowd that once despised them. A skilled fighter might earn his freedom, his name etched in public memory. Some gladiators became celebrities, featured in graffiti, their victories bet on like modern athletes. Women wore jewelry carved with gladiator figures, swooning at their strength. Yet, this fame was fragile. A single slip, a single lost fight, could turn cheers into silence. Glory in the Colosseum was as fleeting as the games themselves. Even as empire faltered, the Colosseum's shadow endured. In times of famine or unrest, emperors still opened its gates, desperate to distract a restless populace. Give him bread and circuses, the saying went, and the Colosseum was a circus of all circuses. It was cheaper than reform, easier than justice, but the crowd's hunger was bottomless. Each show demanded more. More beasts, more blood, more scale. Like feeding fire with wood, the arena consumed empire's resources, burning faster than Rome could sustain. Eventually, the flames began to sputter. As Christianity spread, the moral weight of the games grew heavier. Bishops condemned the spectacles, calling them sinful, corrupt, and degrading. Stories circulated of Christians thrown to lions, whether myth or fact, reinforcing the narrative of cruelty. The Colosseum shifted in perception, from marvel to moral scar. To stand in its seats became shameful, and emperors who once flaunted power there now hesitated. The arena, one stage of glory, was recast as a place of sin. Rome itself was changing, and the Colosseum could no longer carry its old meaning. By the Middle Ages, locals scavenged its stones, yet still believed it held mystical power. Some said sorcerers met in its ruins, that its sands were soaked in supernatural energy. Others swore demons built it, whispering at night through cracked arches. Travelers stood in awe, sketching its vast curves, claiming it was one of the wonders of the world. Though its purpose had shifted, Its aura had not. The Colosseum had transformed into legend, a ruin that spoke of greatness and downfall, mystery and warning. The Renaissance gave the Colosseum new breath. Architects studied it meticulously, using its proportions to design theaters, palaces, and even churches. Its broken arches became inspiration, not shame. Rome itself leaned on the Colosseum as symbol of continuity, proof that even in ruin, the city remained eternal. Tourists from across Europe traveled to witness it, filling journals with descriptions of art. Painters captured its skeleton against golden skies, turning decay into beauty. The Colosseum, no longer Rume's playground of violence, had become its teacher, shaping art and architecture far beyond Italy. Today, the Colosseum holds no swords, no lions, no emperors raising their thumbs. Instead, it holds memory, a mirror of humanity. As a contradictions, we celebrate its engineering, yet mourn its cruelty. We walk its corridors in silence, imagining the roar that once shook its stones. The amphitheater no longer binds citizens to empire but unites people across the world in fascination. Millions visit each year, not for spectacle, but reflection. The Colosseum endures as Rome itself once claimed, eternal not in conquest, but in memory. Step inside the Colosseum today, and what you see is a tourist site polished by centuries of survival. But beneath the surface, its scars whisper louder than its stones. Modern visitors stroll across pathways where gladiators once dragged their tired feet, where criminals prayed for mercy, and where wild beasts prowled beneath iron cages waiting for release. The air now carries the sound of clicking cameras and multilingual guides. But close your eyes, and you can almost hear the pounding of drums, the chants of thousands, and the growl of lions. The walls are cracked, but those cracks are veins that still pulse with memory. Every layer of sand, every broken arch, every shadow under the sunlight hides a story of brutality and glory. It is not just a ruin, it is a living archive, a monument that refuses silence. Tourists may see stone and dust, but what they really walk on is the heartbeat of ancient propaganda. The Colosseum doesn't need a roar anymore. It only needs to exist, reminding us that empires fall, but their spectacles echo far beyond their deaths. That's why the ruin feels alive. It carries the weight of eternity. Beneath the arena floor was the hypogeum, an underground labyrinth of cages, pulleys, and trapdoors that turned the Colosseum into something resembling a giant machine of controlled chaos. Imagine standing there centuries ago, hearing the creak of wooden elevators, the grunt of men pulling ropes, and then suddenly, boom, a wild beast burst through the sand floor as if summoned by the gods. This engineering marvel wasn't simply functional, it was psychological warfare. The audience gasped not only at the danger but at the miracle of it all. A spectacle that blurred the line between religion and reality. To them, Rome wasn't just powerful, it was magical, capable of bending the laws of nature itself. Today, when you descend into those tunnels, silence reigns, but the imagination fills in the rest. You can picture torches flickering against stone, the smell of damp earth mixing with blood, and handlers whispering prayers as they prepared animals to die. What was once a backstage nightmare is now a haunting museum. Yet the shadows still hum with tension. In its emptiness, the hypogeum becomes louder, reminding us of a theater of death that once amazed the world. The Colosseum was never just about games. It was about control. Emperors knew the amphitheater was their loudest microphone, projecting messages louder than any decree or speech. Every battle staged, there was a metaphor. Every death, a political statement. If Rome conquered a new land, its animals would soon fight and die in the arena. If an emperor needed to prove his strength, he would flood the Colosseum for a naval battle reenactment. Bread filled stomachs, but the Colosseum filled imaginations. The people cheered, not realizing they were being fed loyalty disguised as entertainment. Even when Rome struggled with debt, famine, or disease, emperors poured resources into the games, because losing the people's meant losing their grip on power. The Colosseum was the empire's mask behind the roar of lions, and the gleam of armor lay fear of rebellion. Citizens may have believed they had voices, but their roars only echoed the emperor's will. The games weren't freedom, they were the art of distraction perfected. a way to turn blood into loyalty. That's why the Colosseum was never abandoned until Rome itself cracked. High-ranking senators, nobles, and foreign dignitaries filled the best seats in marble rows near the arena floor, sipping wine and whispering alliances while gladiators fought below. To them, the games were a theater of politics, as much as violence. Deals were struck under the roar of the crowd, loyalties cemented with handshakes as swords clashed. Attendance wasn't optional, it was a declaration of allegiance to the emperor. To skip the games was unthinkable, a subtle act of rebellion. Even foreign kings who visited Rome were paraded through the Colosseum, forced to watch Rome's gods in action, as if to remind them, here is what empire looks like. The spectacle wasn't limited to the sand, it stretched into every corner of the amphitheater, weaving politics, diplomacy, and intimidation into one. The Colosseum wasn't simply entertainment, it was a living parliament of fear and admiration. Every gladiator's death sent ripples beyond Rome, reinforcing its image as an unshakable force. Yet ironically, in watching, senators also became prisoners chained not by iron, but by obligation, spectacle, and reputation. To sit there was to be both powerful and powerless. The Colosseum's physical survival was itself propaganda. Earthquakes tore holes into its arches, lightning set fires, and battles scarred its stones. Yet Rome always rebuilt, not just because it needed the games, but because letting the Colosseum collapse would have been admitting weakness. Every repair was symbolic. As long as the Colosseum stood, so did Rome. The empire's identity fused with the to patch a wall was to patch pride. To rebuild seating was to rebuild authority. Even in decline, emperors poured resources into its repair, pretending the empire was still eternal. When marble was replaced or sand imported, it wasn't just maintenance, it was performance. Rome was desperate to keep the illusion alive, and in many ways, it succeeded. Even today, standing before its weathered arches, people don't see weakness. They don't think about the empire's cracks. They think about its might. The Colosseum's ruins, paradoxically, became stronger than the whole. Broken, it still holds more power than perfection ever did. A reminder that survival often outshines glory. The crowd itself was the Colosseum's beating heart. Tens of thousands of Romans packed into seats, chanting names, demanding blood, raising voices so loud they shook the sky. And here's the twist. They believed they had power. The famous thumb's gesture could decide a man's fate, life or death sealed by the whim of the crowd. Yet the truth was more complicated. The emperor usually had the final word, but he allowed the illusion of choice to keep the people engaged. It was manipulation disguised as democracy, power disguised as freedom. The people believed they mattered, and in believing, they became easier to control. The Colosseum gave them drama, and they gave the emperor loyalty. It was a contract written in screams and applause. In the roar of the crowd lay the silence of rebellion, for no one questioned authority when they were too busy cheering it. The amphitheater wasn't just stone, it was a machine, and the people were its gears, spinning without realizing they were turning the emperor's will. Gladiators, the so-called stars of the Colosseum, were often slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals condemned to fight. For many, it was punishment disguised as entertainment, survival wrapped in spectacle. Yet, within that brutality, lay paradox. Some gladiators became celebrities, names echoed across the city, fans painted graffiti of their favorite fighters, and women swooned over warriors who had nothing but scars and chains. Training schools turned men into weapons, forging discipline out of desperation. For some, the arena offered a twisted form of freedima, chance to earn glory, wealth, or even freedom papers if they survived long enough. It was a gamble with death as the dealer. Some gladiators embraced it, carving names into history, while others fought with the hollow gaze of men who had already died inside. The legacy lingers in every cracked stone, a reminder that Rome's greatest heroes were also its greatest victims. The Colosseum elevated and devoured them in the same breath, proving that fame and death are often twins. When Christianity began to spread, the Colosseum's meaning shifted. What was once celebrated as divine spectacle became condemned as pagan cruelty. Bishops called the game sinful, and stories spread of Christians martyred in the arena, whether by beasts or by blade. By the 5th century, The roar of the crowd had faded into silence. The Colosseum wasn't abandoned overnight, slowly withered, its shows shrinking until only whispers remained. What had been Rome's proudest jewel became a scar, a reminder of excess and arrogance. Ironically, the building that once symbolized eternity became a relic of change, a canvas upon which new faith painted judgment. Today, pilgrims and tourists walk the same steps, but instead of cheering, they reflect. The Colosseum no longer entertains. It teaches. Its stones speak not of glory, but of consequence. As centuries passed, the Colosseum was stripped for parts. Marble was carried away to build churches, palaces, and homes. Iron clamps were pried out, leaving pockmarks still visible today. The amphitheater became a quarry, a skeleton cannibalized by the city it once defined. Yet even in ruin, it remained powerful. Travelers sketched it, poets immortalized it, and artists captured its arches and paintings. The ruin itself became art, its silence louder than any roar. And that's the irony. The Colosseum's destruction gave it immortality. If it had remained whole, it might have been forgotten as just another monument. Bata sa ruin. It became legend. Its broken arches tell more truth than perfection ever could. That all empires bleed, all power fades, and time is the ultimate gladiator, and still it stands. The Colosseum has outlived emperors, kings, wars, earthquakes, and thieves. It stands not as a symbol of eternity, but of survival. The arches may be fractured, but their shadows stretch across Rome like veins feeding its heart. Tourists come not to see victory, but to feel history breathing down their necks. They come to walk in the silence, where once there was chaos, to imagine blood, where now there is stone. And in that act, the Colosseum achieves something greater than propaganda. It becomes honest. It whispers that power is fragile, glory is fleeting, and survival is the only real victory. That's why it continues to draw millions. Not because it boasts, but because it humbles. It doesn't roar anymore, it sighs. And in that sigh, we hear the truth of Rome. The Colosseum was more than an amphitheater. It was a mirror reflecting Rome's soul, with all its contradictions. On the surface, it showed unity. Thousands of citizens, from slaves to senators, packed together in one colossal arena. But beneath that surface, it revealed division. The rich sat in marble seats with shade and cushions, while the poor sweated in the upper tiers under the blazing sun. Gladiators shed blood for entertainment, yet senators whispered about policy over their screams. Foreign ambassadors marveled at Roman power, even as they plotted resistance at home. The Colosseum was a machine that turned blood into theater, theater into loyalty, and loyalty into empire. That's why it mattered so much. It wasn't just games, it was identity. Rome didn't just rule through soldiers or law, it ruled through imagination. And the Colosseum was the loudest story Rome ever told about itself. To this day, when people think of ancient Rome, they picture its arches. That's how deeply it shaped memory knots. Only Rome's. But the Colosseum's games also reveal how fragile power can be. Emperors used the arena as both stage and shield. When crowds cheered, it felt like Rome was invincible. But when the cheers faltered, or when the audience booed, it was a warning. Morta non Emperors faced restless mobs who demanded better shows, more bread, or justice for grievances. Imagine being an emperor, seated in the imperial box, and hearing 50,000 voices united in dissatisfaction. That wasn't entertainment anymore, that was danger. The Colosseum was both a weapon and a risk. By giving the people a voice in the arena, emperors opened the door to their own judgment. And sometimes, that judgment was harsh. The amphitheater wasn't only a stage for gladiators, it was also a court where emperors themselves were silently tried. The roar of the crowd could make or break a reign, proving that even the mightiest ruler depended on approval. Power, like the games, was always a performance. Even the architecture of the Colosseum was political genius. Its very design spoke of Rome's might. The arches represented order, balance, and permanence. The material stone, marble, iron ware drawn from across the empire, symbolizing conquest, turned into construction. Seating arrangements reinforced hierarchy. Emperors and elites closest to the action, commoners stacked high above, women and slaves pushed to the margins. It was a map of Roman society, carved into stone. Every visitor could see that place both in the arena and in the empire. That's what made it more than a building. It wasn't only a place for games, it was a blueprint for Roman order. And yet, walking through its remains today, that hierarchy feels hollow. Tourists climb freely where once access was tightly guarded. What was once rigid is now open. The irony is sharp. The structure built to enforce inequality has become, in its ruin, a space for everyone. That reversal is perhaps the Colosseum's last laugh at empire. The Colosseum was also Rome's greatest stage for storytelling. Every battle reenactment, every gladiatorial match, every execution told a tale about Rome's greatness. When prisoners were thrown to beasts, it wasn't just punishment, it was a lesson. The crowd learned that enemies of Rome met only one fate: humiliation and death. When gladiators clashed, it wasn't random. Violence, it was a metaphor for Rome's dominance, discipline, and spectacle. Even naval battles staged in the flooded arena told of Rome's control over nature itself. Everything was symbolic, every show scripted with political meaning. The emperor wasn't only ruler, he was director, and the Colosseum wasn't just stone, it was Rome's living theater. Today, Hollywood may think it invented blockbusters, but in truth, the blueprint was carved in Roman sand centuries ago. Rome understood drama better than anyone, and the Colosseum was their cinema, with death as their film. For the common Roman, attending the Colosseum was a rare escape from the grind of daily life. Most citizens lived in cramped apartments, worked long hours, and rarely had luxuries. But inside the amphitheater, they were part of something bigger. The roar of the crowd, the thrill of the games, the sight of emperors sitting in splendor, it made them feel included in Rome's glory. Bread was distributed, wine sometimes flowed, and for a few hours, the struggles of poverty were drowned out by spectacle. This was the empire's gift and its trap. The Colosseum gave people entertainment, but it also stole their focus. While they cheered, they forgot hunger, taxes, and injustice. The games weren't just leisure, they were anesthesia. Rome didn't need to silence the poor. It only needed to distract them. The Colosseum was proof that sometimes the easiest way to control people is to keep them entertained enough not to revolt. Beyond politics and spectacle, the Colosseum was a space of raw human emotion. Imagine the gladiator standing in the arena, heart pounding, sweat dripping, staring up at tens of thousands of eyes, fear mixed with adrenaline, shame blended with pride. For the crowd, there was excitement, dread, and fascination, all tangled together. No one left the arena untouched. For some, it was trauma. For others, ecstasy. That's what made the Colosseum so unforgettable. It wasn't simply violence, it was emotional theater. To cheer for a man fighting lions wasn't logical, it was primal. To cry for a gladiator's death wasn't compassionate, was catharsis. The Colosseum gave people permission to feel extremes: rage, joy, horror, relief. In its shadow, emotions were not private, they were communal. Rome gave its citizens a gift no market or temple could: the experience of living at the edge of life and death together. That's why the Colosseum's echo is not only in history books, it's in the human psyche itself. Religiously, the Colosseum also stood at the crossroads of Rome's identity. Pagan rituals accompanied the games. Sacrifices were made to gods before battles, and omens were read in blood spilled on sand. The amphitheater was as much a temple as it was an arena. To Rome, divine favor was proven through victory, and the Colosseum was the proof. When Christianity spread, this symbolism turned against Rome. The games became signs of cruelty rather than glory, and the arena shifted from sacred to cursed. Pilgrims later saw it not as a monument of pride but as a reminder of sin. This dual identity, temple and tomb, still clings to its stones. Walk there today, and you can feel both: the awe of pagan power and the weight of Christian judgment. The Colosseum teaches that faith can rewrite, meaning that what is sacred in one era can become shameful in the next. And yet, both truths remain alive in its arches. The Colosseum also shaped global memory. Travelers in the Middle Ages described it with awe. Renaissance artists sketched it into immortality, and poets called it the soul of Rome. Byron, Shelley, and countless others saw in its ruins a metaphor for empire itself. Grandeur decayed, pride crumbled, but beauty everlasting. Even now, filmmakers and novelists return to it, using its shadow to tell new stories. It's more than stone, it's an icon. Its image graces coins, postcards, and cinema screens. The Colosseum isn't only Rome's. It belongs to the imagination of the world. That's why it never fades. To speak of empire is to speak of it. To picture Rome is to picture it. The amphitheater stopped being just a building centuries ago. It became an eternal symbol. And in symbols, there is immortality. Even its silence speaks. Walk inside today when the crowd noise is replaced by tourist chatter, and you can still feel the weight of history pressing on you. The air seems thicker, as if memory itself lingers. The ruins are not empty, they are crowded with ghosts. Gladiators, emperors, slaves, animals, all seem to breathe in the cracks of stone. The Colosseum is a place where time folds, where past and present overlap. That's why people feel awe. There it isn't beauty alone. Its presence, the realization that you stand where life and death were once staged as theater. Few places in the world make you feel that connection so strongly. That's why people return, cameras in hand, hoping to capture not just the arches but the spirit within. But the Colosseum can't convey. Cup to red, eat, must be felt. Ultimately, the Colosseum reminds us of a paradox. What was once Rome's loudest roar is now its quietest whisper. In its prime, it shook with blood and cheers. Today, it humbles with silence. Yet the silence is not weakness, it is wisdom. It teaches that power dazzles but never lasts, that entertainment blinds but truth endures. The Colosseum has seen empires rise and fall, faiths clash and merge, centuries crumble and rebuild, and still it stands. Not because of marble or stone, but because of memory. As long as humans tell stories, the Colosseum will live. It is no longer Rome's weapon, it is humanity's mirror. In its arches we see both pride and downfall, cruelty and resilience, entertainment and eternity. That is its true legacy. Not blood or sand, but the lesson that echoes through time. Empires fall, but stories never die. The Colosseum wasn't just a Roman landmark, it became a global classroom for lessons on power. Think about it. An arena that could hold more than 50,000 people, filled with sound, color, and blood. To the Romans, it said, "This is who we are, masters of the world." But to historians today, it whispers a warning. Greatness built on spectacle can be as fragile as the games themselves. The crowd that cheered today could riot tomorrow. The emperor who was worshipped this morning could be assassinated by nightfall. The Colosseum proves that control built on performance is never fully secure. It dazzles, yes, but it also depends on constant fuel bread. Games, blood. Once the fuel runs out, so does the illusion. And that's why ruins teach us more than victories ever could. When Christianity gained strength in Rome, the Colosseum's purpose began to shift. The same stones that once glorified Jupiter and Mars soon echoed with new meaning. Christian thinkers condemned the games as brutal and sinful, turning the arena into a symbol of cruelty rather than triumph. Later, legends even claimed Christians were martyred inside its walls, though evidence is debated. Still, the association stuck. Pilgrims came to see it not as a monument of empire, but as a site of sacrifice. That change in narrative was powerful. The same structure that once embodied Roman glory now stood as proof of its moral downfall. It's a reminder of how stories shape legacy. What one generation sees as greatness, another sees as shame. The Colosseum carries both truths like scars, etched into stone. The Middle Ages nearly erased the Colosseum altogether. Locals treated it like a quarry, hauling away marble, iron, and stone for churches, palaces, and fortresses. Earthquakes weakened its arches. Thieves stripped its guts, and nature clawed at its foundations. For centuries, It looked less like a monument and more like a ruin fading into memory. And yet, somehow, it survived. Maybe because even in ruin, it was too impressive to destroy completely. Travelers who stumbled upon it wrote with awe. Poets compared it to eternity, and artists painted its silhouette against the Roman sky. What survived wasn't just stone, it was a legend. The Colosseum proved that some structures are too iconic to vanish. Even when dismantled, it continued to exist in imagination. That's resilience. Survival not by strength alone, but by meaning, by the Renaissance. The Colosseum was reborn. Scholars studied it, architects sketched it, and the world began to treat it as a treasure instead of a quarry. It became a stage once more, not for blood but for art. Painters used it as a backdrop, poets described it as the soul of Rome, and explorers returned home with tales of its grandeur. The Colosseum was no longer just ruins, it was a symbol of human creativity and ambition. This shift shows how history evolves. What was once condemned as cruelty became celebrated as culture. The amphitheater stopped being only Rome's, it became everyone's. Tourists, artists, scholars all claimed it as part of a shared human story. The Colosseum didn't just endear time, it reinvented itself through it. Even in modern times, the Colosseum continues to transform. Today, it draws millions of visitors from across the world, standing as one of the most photographed sites on the planet. It's not a place of death anymore. It's a place of memory. Families take selfies. Guides tell stories. Drones capture aerial shots of its arches. And yet, behind every photo is the shadow of history. People sense the weight of what happened there. They laugh, smile, pose. But deep down, take no. Terry standing in a theater where lives were once gambled away for applause. That's the paradox of tourism. Celebrating beauty while treading on sorrow. The Colosseum has become both playground and graveyard. And that's exactly why it fascinates. It refuses to be simple. The Colosseum's legacy has also bled into popular culture. Movies like Gladiator turned its memory into modern legend. Video games let players fight in its arena. Documentaries reconstructed spectacles, and fashion brands use its silhouette as an emblem of power. It's more than ruins, its branding. The Colosseum has become a global icon, as recognizable as the Eiffel Tower or the Statue of Liberty. And yet, unlike those, it carries blood in its stones. That's what makes it magnetic. It isn't just beautiful, it's dangerous, haunted, complicated. To engage with it is to touch not just Rome's past, but humanity's extremes. Cruelty, ambition, endurance, imagination. The Colosseum is proof that culture feeds on contradictions. Standing inside the Colosseum today, one can almost hear the ghosts of gladiators, the creak of wooden gates, the growl of beasts, the clash of steel. It lingers in the silence. For some visitors, it's unsettling. For others, thrilling, but either way, it stirs emotion. That's the power of place. The Colosseum doesn't need actors anymore. Its stones tell the story. Its ruins carry the weight. A broken arch speaks of time, a weathered step of thousands of feet, a crack of centuries of earthquakes. The amphitheater doesn't need restoration to live, it breathes through decay. That's why ruins often feel more alive than perfect buildings. They hold not just history but memory. And memory speaks louder when it's fragile. The Colosseum is also a reminder of environmental change. In its prime, exotic animals from Africa and Asia were shipped to Rome for games. Lions, elephants, giraffes, even crocodiles marched across its sand. Today, those species are protected, many endangered. What was once entertainment is now recognized as cruelty. The Colosseum unintentionally forces us to reflect. How far have we come, and how far have we not? Violence remains in modern culture, though packaged differently. Sports, cinema, gaming, they echo the same hunger for spectacle, but the Colosseum shows us the raw version. Stripped of filters, it's both past and mirror, asking us uncomfortable questions. We may not cheer death today, but we still love watching conflict. That's why the Colosseum feels timeless. Politically, the Colosseum continues to matter. Italian leaders use it as a backdrop for speeches. The Vatican is littered during Good Friday ceremonies, and activists project slogans on its walls. To highlight global crises, its arches aren't just ruins, they're billboards for humanity's conscience. That adaptability is why it endures. It can bear Rome's pride, Christianity's warning, tourism's jewel, or activism's platform all at once. Few monuments carry such flexibility. The Colosseum isn't stuck in history. It continues to evolve with us. That's why it matters not just as a ruin, but as a living participant in culture. Every era finds its own meaning in its shadow. That's immortality of the truest kind. Ultimately, the Colosseum shows us the duality of human nature. We build wonders while committing horrors. We create beauty from cruelty, memory from pain. Rome celebrated its dominance in the arena, but history remembers both the glory and the gore. That's why the Colosseum endures as one of the most honest monuments ever built. It doesn't hide contradiction, it embodies it. And maybe that's why it fascinates across centuries. Because deep down, we're all drawn to that tension between greatness and flaw, between art and violence, between immortality and decay. The Colosseum doesn't let us look away. It forces us to confront who we are not, just as Romans, but Hellmans, and that's why its arches still echo with secrets, waiting for us to listen. The Colosseum is more than stone. It's memory, carved into arches. Step inside, and you're stepping into centuries of spectacle, cruelty, celebration, and survival. This isn't just a ruin, it's a stage that never really ended. The audience is still here. Only not a tourists with cameras, instead of Romans with bread in hand. The sand is gone, but the echoes remain. You feel it when you touch the weathered walls. An empire's hunger for control, for entertainment, for eternity. The Colosseum is Rome's open diary, its secrets whispered through cracks, waiting for each new visitor to read them. For the gladiators, this arena was a test of courage, but also of fate. Every fight was a gamble between life and death, freedom and chains. Some were volunteers chasing glory, others slaves forced into battle, but all carried the same burden, to roar of the crowd, deciding their destiny. The Colosseum stripped humanity bare, showing how fragile power really is. A champion could rise today, only to fall tomorrow. It reminds us that fame built on blood is as fleeting as applause, and yet the gladiator myth endures, not because of death, but because of resilience. Their struggle still inspires stories, games, and films. The emperors used the Colosseum like a throne in disguise. By giving games, they gave Rome distraction, stability, and pride. Bread for the stomach, blood for the Eistat. What's the deal? The amphitheater became a political weapon, more powerful than laws or speeches. A satisfied crowd forgot their hunger, their anger, even their fear. The emperor didn't just rule from the palace, he ruled from the arena. That's why the Colosseum mattered so much. It wasn't about entertainment, it was about control. To watch the games was to submit, willingly or not, to Rome's script. And in that script, the emperor was always the star. Animals brought into the Colosseum tell another story. The empire's reach: lions from Africa, elephants from India, bears from the north, all paraded to prove Rome's dominance over nature. But hidden in the spectacle is a darker truth. These beasts were symbols of conquest, yes, but also victims of it. Their forced presence made the crowd cheer, yet their deaths stained the sand just like human blood. Today, we see this cruelty differently. Where Romans saw victory, we see loss, and that shift in perspective is the Colosseum's greatest gift. It forces us to compare who we were with who we've become. When Christianity rose, the Colosseum's meaning cracked open. Once sacred to Rome's gods, it was later condemned as sinful. Pilgrims visited not to honor gladiators, but to mourn martyrs, real or imagined. Legends painted the arena as a place of faith tested by fire. Even if the evidence remains debated, the legend has power too. The Colosseum became both shrine and warning, a reminder that cruelty has consequences. What was once Rome's pride became its symbol of shame, and yet, through that transformation, it gained new life. It was no longer just about Rome, it became about humanity's journey toward compassion. However slow and flawed, By the Middle Ages, the Colosseum had become a skeleton of its former self. Earthquakes tore at its bones. Popes stripped its marble for cathedrals. Locals hauled away stones for houses. The arena that once showcased empire now fed its ruins to build a new city. But survival wasn't only in walls. Even as it crumbled, it inspired. Travelers wrote of its majesty. Poets compared it to eternity. And legends insisted that as long as the Colosseum stood, Rome itself would never fall. That prophecy gave it power. A ruin turned into myth. Sometimes survival isn't about strength, it's about symbolism. The Renaissance rediscovered the Colosseum with fresh eyes. Artists painted it. Architects studied it. Scholars measured its arches. It became not a quarry, but a treasure. Rome itself shifted from medieval town to live-in museum, and the Colosseum was its crown. This revival shows the power of perspective. One age, so rubble. Another so beauty. And that's the Colosseum's trick. It adapts to each era's story. Gladiators made it thrilling. Pilgrims made it holy. Tourists made it iconic. No matter how you see it, it reflects you back. That's why it never fades. It's not static, it's alive in every retelling. In modern times, the Colosseum has become a global icon. Millions visit each year, not for blood, but for memory. It stars in films, inspires novels, and appears on t-shirts, postcards, and coins. But behind the selfies and souvenirs, the weight of history lingers. You can't walk those arches without sensing the ghosts that dual tourists trap and tomb gives. The Colosseum, its edge, it's a paradox. A place of joy and sorrow, triumph and tragedy. That's why it resonates worldwide. It isn't just Rome's story, it's humanity's story. And as long as people crave stories, the Colosseum will never be silent. Politicians, popes, and activists all continued to use the Colosseum as a stage. It's been knit up against war, against executions, and in solidarity with global causes. Its arches are no longer filled with gladiators, but with messages meant for the world. This shows its true immortality, not as ruined, but as relevance. The Colosseum isn't frozen in history. It evolves with time. Its stones have carried meanings for 2,000 years, and they will carry more tomorrow. That's why it endures, not because of what it was, but because of what it still is. A living voice carved in silence. Ultimately, the Colosseum is both masterpiece and mirror. It shows us the heights of human ambition and the depths of human cruelty. It dazzles with beauty, yet chills with memory. To stand inside it is to feel awe and unease together. And maybe that's why we can't look away. The Colosseum doesn't offer easy answers. Instead, it asks hard questions. What do we value? What do we celebrate? What do we ignore? Rome built it to last forever. And in a way, it did. Because every time we tell its story, we keep the arena alive. And in those echoes, Rome still breathes.